Princess Elevara stood before the tall windows of her chamber and watched the golden sun set over the capital city of the Valorian Empire. She was the youngest daughter of Emperor Thalrix, and she carried herself with the pride of 10,000 years of royal bloodline coursing through her veins. Her skin was pale blue, and her eyes glowed with soft silver light, and she stood nearly 3 meters tall like all Valorians. Tomorrow she would travel to Nexus Prime, the great neutral station where species from across the galaxy gathered for trade and diplomacy. It was her first solo diplomatic mission, and she had spent months preparing for this moment. A soft chime announced a visitor, and her door slid open to reveal her father's chief advisor, a stern old Valorian named Counselor Maven. "Your Highness," he said with a bow, "the Emperor has finalized your security detail for the journey." Elevara nodded with confidence because she had requested Commander Thyros and his elite guard unit, the finest warriors in the Empire. "Commander Thyros will lead your protection as you requested," Maven continued, "but there has been one addition to your escort." "Addition?" she asked with a frown. "A human soldier has been assigned to your personal detail by order of the Emperor himself." The princess felt her face twist with confusion, and then with something close to disgust. Humans were a species the Valorians had only recently encountered, small creatures from a mid-range planet called Earth. They were physically weak compared to most galactic species, and they possessed no natural weapons or defenses, and their technology was barely adequate for interstellar travel. "Why would my father insult me with such a guardian?" she demanded. "The Emperor believes humans have certain qualities that may prove useful," Maven replied carefully. "And the Galactic Council has been encouraging their integration into diplomatic missions. So I am to be a political symbol," Elevara said with bitterness in her voice. "Dragging along some primitive creature to show how accepting we are of lesser species." Maven did not argue because he knew the princess well enough to understand that her mind was already made. The next morning, Elevara walked through the palace halls toward the landing platform where her ship waited. Commander Thyros stood at attention with his 12 guards, each one a towering Valorian warrior in gleaming silver armor. And there, at the end of the line, stood the human. He was tiny compared to the others, barely reaching the chest of the shortest Valorian guard. He wore simple dark clothing with no impressive armor, and his face showed no expression at all. His hair was black, and his eyes were dark brown, and his skin was a warm tan color that seemed so plain compared to Valorian blue. "Sergeant Kang Duhayan," Thyros announced with barely hidden contempt in his voice. Assigned by Imperial order, the human bowed respectfully and spoke in a quiet voice. "It is my honor to serve, Your Highness." Elevara looked at him the way one might look at an insect that had wandered into a formal dinner. "Just stay out of the way," she said coldly, "and try not to embarrass the Empire." She walked past him without another glance and boarded the diplomatic vessel called the Starlight Crown. The ship was magnificent, with halls of polished crystal and chambers draped in the finest materials from 100 worlds. Elevara settled into her quarters and immediately forgot about the human entirely. Commander Thyros organized his guards into rotating shifts, and they patrolled the ship with proud efficiency. The human walked the halls too, but nobody paid him any attention because he was simply beneath their notice. 2 of the Valorian guards found him examining a door panel on the second day of the journey. "What are you doing, little creature?" one guard asked with a mocking laugh. "Learning the ship," Duhayan replied simply. "Why bother?" the other guard said with a sneer. "If anything happens, you would only get in our way." Duhayan did not argue or defend himself. He simply nodded politely and walked away, leaving the guards to laugh at his retreating form. In the shadows of the lower decks, a figure in dark clothing received a transmission on a hidden device. "The princess departed on schedule," a distorted voice said through the speaker. "The Void Fangs are authorized to proceed." "Understood," the figure whispered. She will never reach Nexus Prime. The figure removed the device and crushed it under their heel before melting back into the darkness of the ship. 12 hunters waited in silence, scattered throughout the vessel in disguise, patient and deadly. They were the Void Fangs, the most feared assassins in the galaxy. No target had ever escaped them, and they had killed kings and generals and crime lords across 1,000 systems. The princess was already dead in their minds because they had never failed a contract. That night, as the ship sailed through the streaming colors of hyperspace, Sergeant Kang Duhayan sat alone in his small quarters. He reviewed the crew manifest on a datapad, comparing names and faces with careful attention. His eyes narrowed when he reached one entry, a maintenance worker named Gossel, who was listed in the records. Duhayan had watched every crew member board the ship, and he remembered every face. Gossel had not been among them, yet here was his name on the manifest as if he had always been there. The human set down the datapad and stared at the wall with quiet intensity. Something was wrong on this ship, and nobody else had noticed because nobody else was looking. He stood and checked the small weapons hidden beneath his plain clothing. Tomorrow he would watch more carefully, and he would find the truth. The princess thought he was useless, and the guards thought he was a joke, and perhaps that was exactly what he needed them to think. Sergeant Kang Duhayan had survived 12 combat deployments on 3 different worlds. He had fought in darkness and silence against enemies that should have destroyed him. He was human, and humans were survivors, and he would protect the princess whether she wanted his protection or not. That was his mission, and he would not fail. 3 days into the voyage, Princess Elivera had almost forgotten that the human even existed. She spent her time reviewing diplomatic documents and practicing the formal greetings, required for meeting delegates from 17 different species. Commander Thyros reported to her each morning with updates on ship security, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The human was never mentioned in these reports because nobody considered him worth mentioning. But Sergeant Kang Duhayan was very busy during those 3 days. He walked every corridor of the Starlight Crown until he knew them better than the crew who lived aboard. He memorized the location of every door and every maintenance hatch and every ventilation shaft. He counted the steps between key locations and noted which areas had poor lighting. He watched the crew with patient eyes that never seemed to blink. There was the servant who delivered meals to the princess, a thin alien with nervous hands who always looked at the floor. There was a guard whose boots did not match the standard issue worn by all other guards. There was a technician who checked the same panel every day, even though it required no maintenance. Duhayan made no accusations because he had no proof, but he added each name to a list in his mind. On the 3rd evening, Commander Thyros found the human examining a junction box near the princess's quarters. "What are you doing here?" Thyros demanded with anger in his deep voice. "Checking for surveillance devices," Duhayan replied calmly. Thyros laughed with genuine amusement at the answer. "Human, this ship was swept for listening devices before we departed, and my guards have maintained perfect security ever since. I found 3 devices," Duhayan said, holding up his hand to show tiny metal objects. 2 in the corridor and 1 inside the princess's sitting room. The commander's laughter died instantly. He snatched the devices from the human's hand and examined them with growing concern. "These are Void Fang markers," Thyros whispered with sudden fear in his eyes. "Yes," Duhayan agreed. "That is impossible," Thyros insisted. "The Void Fangs are just stories that criminals tell to frighten each other. They are real," Duhayan said quietly. "And they are on this ship." Thyros stared at the human for a long moment before his pride won the battle against his fear. "You found some illegal listening devices, nothing more," the commander decided. "I will increase patrols and report this to the princess in the morning." "You should report it now," Duhayan suggested. "I do not take orders from humans," Thyra snapped before walking away with heavy footsteps. Duhayan watched him go and then returned to his quiet patrol of the ship. That night, Princess Elevora held a formal dinner with her 3 advisors in the elegant dining chamber. The walls displayed holographic images of famous Valorian victories, and the table was set with crystal glasses and silver plates. Duhayan stood in the corner of the room, silent and still like a piece of furniture. The advisors discussed trade agreements and alliance proposals, while the princess listened with practiced attention. Servants brought dishes from the kitchen, and a food taster sampled each plate before it was placed before the royal guest. Duhayan watched the taster carefully and noticed something strange. The taster checked the first 3 courses properly, but on the 4th course, he only pretended to taste the food. His spoon touched his lips but never entered his mouth. Duhayan stepped forward, just as a servant placed the plate before the princess. "Forgive me, Your Highness," he said while smoothly lifting the plate away. "I believe this dish is grown cold and should be replaced." Elevora stared at him with shock and anger at his interruption. "How dare you touch my food, human?" "My apologies," Duhayan said with a bow. "I only wish to ensure your comfort." He carried the plate away while the princess glared at his back. Later that night, Duhayan tested the food in his quarters using a small device hidden in his belongings. The scanner confirmed what he had suspected, and the dish contained enough poison to kill 3 Valorians. He destroyed the evidence and added the food taster to his list of enemies aboard the ship. The hour grew late, and most of the crew went to their rest. Duhayan took position outside the princess's door, standing in the shadows where he could see both directions of the corridor. Near midnight, Elevora emerged from her quarters for a glass of water and found him there. "You again," she said with irritation. "Why are you lurking outside my door?" "Standing guard, Your Highness. Commander Thyros has guards for that purpose," she reminded him. "Yes," Duhayan agreed without moving. She studied his face and saw nothing there but calm patience. "Do you ever sleep, human?" "I sleep when you are safe, Highness." Something in his voice made her pause, but she shook off the feeling and returned to her chambers. What a strange little creature, she thought as she closed her door. In the darkness of the corridor, Duhayan remained at his post. He had intercepted a coded transmission earlier that day, using equipment he had smuggled aboard. The signal used Void Fang encryption, and he had spent 3 hours breaking the code. The message confirmed his worst fears. There were 12 assassins on the ship, and they would strike when the vessel dropped out of hyperspace for its navigation check. Help would be too far away, and the crew would be caught completely by surprise. Duhayan had considered warning Commander Theros again, but he knew the proud Valorian would not believe him. He had considered warning the princess, but she would dismiss his concerns without a second thought. So he would prepare alone. He had mapped the ship and identified the enemy agents and planned his response. He was one human against 12 of the deadliest killers in the galaxy. The odds were terrible, but Duhayan had faced terrible odds before. He was human, and humans did not surrender, and humans did not stop fighting until the battle was truly over. Tomorrow the ship would drop from hyperspace, and the hunters would reveal themselves. They expected easy prey and minimal resistance. They expected to slaughter pampered Valorians who had never faced real danger. They did not expect Sergeant Kang Duhayan. And that, he thought with grim satisfaction, would be their fatal mistake. The Starlight Crown dropped out of hyperspace into the cold silence of deep space. Stars glittered in the eternal darkness outside the viewports, and the ship hung motionless while its navigation systems recalculated the next jump. This was standard procedure, and the crew had performed it 100 times before. Princess Elevora sat in her quarters, reviewing trade proposals when every light on the ship suddenly died. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, casting everything in dim red shadows. She stood quickly and moved toward her door, but it would not open because the power systems had failed. Somewhere in the distance, she heard shouting, and then the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. Fear crept into her heart, cold and unfamiliar. In the main corridor, Commander Thyros rallied his guards with commanding shouts. "Form up! Protect the princess! Move!" The Valorian warriors drew their weapons and advanced toward the royal quarters. They made it only 20 steps before shadows detached from the walls and attacked. The assassins struck with perfect coordination, 4 of them appearing from hidden positions. One was a Krivari with 4 arms and blades in each hand. One was a Silith, a serpentine creature with venomous fangs. The third was a massive Grothian covered in armored scales. The fourth was a pale Nethri, whose body seemed to flicker between solid and transparent. Commander Thyros fought bravely, but the Void Fangs were faster and more skilled than anything he had ever faced. His guards fell one by one, cut down in seconds by enemies who moved like deadly ghosts. Thyros blocked a strike from the Krivari and countered with a powerful thrust. The Silith slipped behind him and sank its fangs into his neck. The poison worked instantly, and the proud commander collapsed to the floor. His last thought was of shame, because he had failed to protect his princess. In her quarters, Alavara heard the sounds of combat grow closer and then suddenly stop. The silence was somehow worse than the fighting. Her door exploded inward, and she screamed as 2 assassins entered the room. One was a thin insectoid creature with razor-sharp limbs. The other was a bulky humanoid covered in ceremonial scars and carrying a curved blade. "Princess Alavara of the Valorian Empire," the scarred one said with a cruel smile. "The Void Fangs send their regards." She backed away until she hit the wall, trapped with nowhere to run. The insectoid raised its bladed arm to strike. A small figure appeared in the doorway behind them, moving with silent speed. Sergeant Kang Duhayan drove a blade into the base of the insectoid's skull before it could react. The creature dropped without a sound. The scarred assassin spun with impressive speed and swung his curved blade at the human's head. Duhayan ducked under the strike and drove his palm into the assassin's throat. The killer staggered back, choking, and Duhayan finished him with a precise strike to the heart. Both assassins fell in less than 4 seconds. The princess stared at the human with her mouth open and her silver eyes wide with shock. Duhayan wiped his blade clean and extended his hand toward her. "We must move, Highness. You killed them," she whispered with disbelief. "Yes, and there are more coming." He took her arm and pulled her toward the door without waiting for permission. They stepped over the bodies and into the corridor, where the dim emergency lights cast long shadows. 3 more assassins blocked their path, including the 4-armed Krivari who had killed Commander Thyros. "Look, brothers," the Krivari laughed. "The princess has a human pet." "Step aside, little creature," another assassin said. "And we might let you live." Duhayan pushed the princess behind him and drew a second blade. "Stay behind me, Highness. Human, you cannot fight them," Alavara whispered urgently. "They are Void Fangs." "I know what they are." The Krivari attacked first, all 4 arms moving in a blur of steel. Duhayan did not try to match the alien's speed. Instead, he moved inside the reach of those whirling blades, too close for them to be effective. His blade found the gap between the Krivari's chest plates, and the assassin gasped in surprise. Duhayan twisted the blade and pulled it free as the 4-armed killer fell. The second assassin charged with a roar of rage. Duhayan sidestepped the clumsy attack and opened the creature's throat with a single slash. The third assassin was more cautious, circling with professional patience. "You are skilled for a human," the killer admitted. "You are slow for an assassin," Duhayan replied. They exchanged 3 rapid strikes, testing each other's defenses. On the 4th exchange, Duhayan feinted low and struck high. His blade pierced the assassin's eye, and the Void Fang died with a look of genuine surprise on his face. Princess Alivara watched the entire battle in stunned silence. 8 seconds had passed since the fighting began. 3 elite assassins lay dead at her feet. The human turned to face her, and she saw no fear in his dark eyes, only calm determination. 9 more remain, he said simply. We need to reach the engine room. Why there? Because they will not expect us to go deeper into the ship. And I know a safe route. She looked at the bodies again, and then at the small human who had killed them. Who are you? She asked with a trembling voice. I am your escort, Highness, Duhayan answered, and I will protect you. He took her hand and led her into the darkness of the ship. Behind them, more shadows began to move as the remaining Void Fangs realized something had gone terribly wrong with their perfect assassination. The hunt was no longer one-sided. The prey had teeth, and the hunters were about to learn what it meant to face a human who would not stop fighting. The maintenance tunnels of the Starlight Crown were narrow and dark, designed for service robots rather than living beings. Princess Alivara had to crouch low to fit through passages that the human walked through easily. How do you know these tunnels exist? She whispered. I explored them during the voyage, Duhayan answered quietly. Why would you explore maintenance tunnels? Because assassins use maintenance tunnels. She had no response to that simple logic. They moved through the darkness for several minutes before Duhayan raised his hand to signal a stop. He pressed his ear against the wall and listened with intense concentration. 2 of them, he breathed, searching the deck above us. Can we avoid them? We could, but I prefer to reduce their numbers. He opened a small hatch in the ceiling and pulled himself up with surprising strength for such a small creature. Alivara waited alone in the darkness, her heart pounding with fear. She heard brief sounds of struggle above her, a grunt and a crash, and then terrible silence. A moment later, Duhayan dropped back through the hatch. Dark blood stained his hands, but he seemed uninjured. 7 remaining, he reported. They continued through the tunnels until they reached a junction where multiple paths met. Duhayan paused and turned to face the princess with serious eyes. I need to explain something, Highness. Explain what? Why humans are dangerous. She almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement, but the body she had seen stopped the laughter in her throat. My world is called Earth, Duhayan said while checking his weapons, and it is a harsh place by galactic standards. Every species thinks their homeworld is harsh, Alivara replied. Earth has extreme temperatures, violent weather, dangerous predators, toxic plants, and natural disasters that can kill thousands in moments. He spoke without pride, simply stating facts. Humans evolved to survive all of these threats, and we did it without claws or fangs or venom or natural armor. Then how did you survive? We adapted, he said simply. We learned to use tools and weapons, and we learned to hunt creatures larger and stronger than ourselves. A sound echoed through the tunnels, and Duhayan fell silent. He moved ahead slowly, leaving the princess at the junction while he investigated. Around the corner, he found 2 more Void Fangs searching the passages. They were a bonded pair of Yellic hunters, reptilian creatures that fought together as one. Duhayan retreated and found a different approach, climbing through a ventilation shaft to position himself above them. When he dropped from the ceiling, they barely had time to react. He killed the first with a blade through the spine. The second Yellic shrieked with rage and grief at the death of its bond partner. It fought with desperate fury, scratching and biting and trying to crush the human in its powerful grip. Duhayan took the damage without complaint. Claws raked across his arm and teeth sank into his shoulder, but he did not stop fighting. He drove his blade into the Yellic's chest once, twice, 3 times. The creature finally fell, and Duhayan stood over it with blood running down his arm. He returned to the princess, who gasped at the sight of his wounds. You are injured. "It is manageable," he said while wrapping his arm with a strip of cloth. "We should find medical supplies after," he said firmly. 5 remaining. They moved deeper into the ship, approaching the engine room from below. Olivera found herself watching the human with new eyes. He was wounded and tired, but he showed no signs of slowing down. "Why do you fight so hard for someone who treated you like nothing?" she asked suddenly. Duhayan paused and considered the question carefully. "Because you are someone's daughter," he answered. "And that is enough. That is not a logical reason. Humans are not always logical." "Highness." They reached a ladder that led up to the engineering deck. Duhayan climbed first, checking for danger before helping the princess ascend. The engine room was vast and filled with humming machinery. Emergency power kept the core systems running, but most of the chamber was lost in shadow. "The communication array is connected to this room," Duhayan explained. "If I can restore power, we can send a distress signal. The assassins will know where we are. Yes, they will come to us instead of us hunting them." He moved to a control panel and began working with practiced efficiency. The princess watched him and realized that he had planned this from the beginning. He had known the ship would be attacked, and he had prepared for exactly this scenario. "How long have you known about the assassins?" she demanded. "Since the second day of the voyage. Why did you not warn us?" "I tried to warn Commander Thyrus," Duhayan said without looking up. "He did not believe me." Olivera thought of the proud commander who had dismissed the human as worthless. Thyrus was dead now, along with all his elite guards. Only the human remained. A warning light flashed on Duhayan's panel. "They are coming," he said. 4 of them, approaching from the main entrance. He drew his blades and moved to stand between the princess and the doorway. "Stay near the reactor housing," he instructed. "If I fall, there is a blade taped beneath the console. What am I supposed to do with a blade?" "Whatever you must to survive." The emergency lights flickered as heavy footsteps approached. 4 shadows appeared at the entrance, the last of the Void Fangs. Their leader was a massive creature of living stone, a granite lord from the mining worlds. Beside him stood a Nethri ghostwalker, a thornback covered in poisoned spines, and a tall figure wrapped entirely in black cloth. "Impressive, human," the granite lord rumbled. "You have killed 8 of my brothers and sisters. I will kill 4 more," Duhayan replied calmly. The granite lord laughed, and the sound was like boulders grinding together. "We shall see. Little predator, we shall see." Duhayan raised his blades and prepared to face the final battle. The 4 assassins spread out to surround the wounded human. Their movements were smooth and coordinated, showing years of working together as a killing team. The Nethri ghostwalker flickered and vanished, becoming nearly invisible. The thornback circled to the left, poison dripping from its quills. The wrapped figure drew twin daggers that gleamed with deadly sharpness. The granite lord stood at the center, confident that his stone body could withstand any attack. "You fought well for a lesser species," the granite lord admitted. "But this ends now." Duhayan did not waste breath on words. He moved first, launching himself at the wrapped figure before the others could react. The cloaked assassin was fast, incredibly fast, blocking the first strike and countering with blinding speed. But Duhayan had expected speed and had planned for it. He let the assassin's blade slice across his ribs while he drove his own weapon through the figure's throat. The wrapped assassin fell, and Duhayan spun to face the next threat. The thornback fired a spray of poison quills from its back. Duhayan dove behind a piece of machinery, but 3 quills found his leg. He could feel the poison beginning to burn through his veins. "You are already dead, human," the thornback hissed with satisfaction. Duhayan pulled the quills from his leg and kept moving. He had maybe 10 minutes before the poison reached his heart, and he intended to use every second. The Nethri appeared behind him without warning. Duhayan twisted at the last moment, turning a killing blow into a deep cut across his back. He grabbed the Ghostwalker's arm before it could fade again and broke it with a brutal twist. The Nethri screamed and became solid, losing concentration from the pain. Duhayan's blade ended its screaming forever. 2 assassins remained, but Duhayan was barely standing. Blood ran freely from multiple wounds, and the poison made his movements slower and clumsier. The Thornback fired another volley of quills. Duhayan raised his arm to protect his face and felt the burning needles pierce his flesh. "Just die already!" The Thornback shrieked with frustration. Duhayan pulled a metal rod from the nearby machinery and threw it with all his remaining strength. The rod pierced the Thornback's eye and sank deep into its brain. The creature dropped without another sound. Only the Granite Lord remained. The massive assassin advanced slowly, confident in his invulnerability. "Your weapons cannot hurt me, human," he declared. "My body is living stone." Duhayan looked at his blades, then at the stone giant. The Granite Lord was right, and steel could not pierce that rocky hide. But Duhan had prepared for this enemy too. He stumbled toward the reactor housing, leading the Granite Lord deeper into the engineering section. "Running will not save you," the assassin laughed. Duhayan reached a specific panel and pressed a sequence of buttons. A massive discharge of plasma vented from a nearby conduit, engulfing the Granite Lord in superheated energy. The stone assassin screamed as his body cracked and shattered from the extreme temperature change. When the plasma cleared, only fragments remained of the mighty Granite Lord. Duhayan collapsed to his knees, finally spent. Princess Alavara ran to his side and caught him before he hit the floor. "Duhayan!" she cried, using his name for the first time. "The signal," he gasped. "Send the distress signal." She lowered him gently and rushed to the console. Her fingers flew across the controls, and within moments, an emergency broadcast was streaming into space. She returned to the human and knelt beside him. His face was pale, and his breathing was shallow, and blood pooled beneath his broken body. "Help is coming," she told him urgently. "You must hold on." "The poison," he whispered. "There is anti-venom in my quarters." Hidden under the bed, she looked at his wounds and knew he would not survive long enough for anyone to retrieve it. "Tell me how to slow the poison." "You cannot. There must be something." He smiled weakly, the first time she had seen any expression on his face. "Humans are stubborn," he said. "I will try to stay alive." She tore strips from her royal robes and pressed them against his worst wounds. Her hands became stained with human blood, and she did not care. The minutes stretched like hours while she worked to keep him breathing. Finally, the ship's systems restored themselves as backup crews from a nearby patrol vessel boarded the Starlight Crown. Medical teams rushed to the engine room and found the princess of the Valorian Empire kneeling in blood beside a dying human. "Save him," she commanded with royal authority. "Save him or I will have every one of you executed." They worked frantically, injecting anti-venom and sealing wounds and stabilizing his vital signs. It was a near thing, closer than anyone wanted to admit. But Sergeant Kang Duhayan survived because humans are stubborn and because he had made a promise to protect the princess. 3 weeks later, Duhayan stood in the grand throne room of the Valorian Palace. His wounds had healed, though scars would remain forever. The Emperor himself had summoned him, and the entire court watched with curious eyes. Princess Alavara stood beside her father's throne, wearing formal robes of silver and gold. "Sergeant Kang Duhayan," the Emperor announced, "you have saved the life of our beloved daughter and destroyed 12 Voidfang assassins single-handedly." Duhayan bowed respectfully but said nothing. "Name your reward, human, and if it is within our power, it shall be yours." Before Duhayan could respond, Alavara stepped forward. "Father, I would make a request." The Emperor raised an eyebrow but nodded for her to continue. I asked that Sergeant Duhaim be assigned permanently as my personal guardian, with a rank equal to a commander of the Royal Guard. Whispers rippled through the assembled nobles. The Emperor studied his daughter's face and saw something new there, respect, and perhaps something more. "Is this acceptable to you, Sergeant?" Duhaim looked at the princess and remembered the cold dismissal of their first meeting. He saw none of that coldness now, only genuine gratitude and admiration. "It is my honor to serve, Your Majesty." And so it was that a human from a small planet called Earth became the shadow of a Valorian princess. In the months that followed, dignitaries and diplomats would ask about the small figure who stood silently beside her at every function. "Is he dangerous?" they would whisper. And Alavara would smile and answer with pride in her voice. "He is the most dangerous being I have ever known, and the kindest." Duhaim would remain silent, watching the crowd with patient eyes, ready to protect his princess from any threat. Because that was his mission, and Sergeant Kang Duhaim had never failed a mission yet.